So Jesus versus the church. What went wrong? Hey guys, it's John sitting here in my living room. We had what I think will probably be our last snow of the year last night. At least I hope it's the last snow of the year. It looks like it might be. Beautiful out there. But I wanted to hop on and talk about what if Jesus came back today? Would he even recognize his teachings in the modern church? Let's get a couple things off the table right away. Christianity is a later construct. It didn't really come about until long after Jeshua was gone from this earth. And what it really is it's a set of rules and doctrines and teachings that were added around a much simpler message. And I want to talk about it because the church that we look at today is literally a mess. It's a mess of ideas. And so let's talk about some of these claims. Jeshua's main teachings were about loving one another and the kingdom of heaven within you. And all of these ideas that you are divine. If you look at it, ye are gods, the kingdom of heaven's within you, as I said. If you, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. It's always about you and your direct connection to the divine, the direct connection to God, and this idea that love is the core of it all. But that seems to be a separate message from what the church is espousing these days. And so let's talk about some of the things that Jeshua actually taught, and let's dive into some of the things that directly come from Christianity, but not of Jeshua. Jeshua was all about love your neighbor. The Christianity is where you have the laws. You have all these laws that you must follow, and all these rules you must follow. The concept of the laws versus the love is interesting because you find that just the application of the laws is not loving. They want punishment, they want judgment, they want fear, they want anxiety, they want guilt. All of those things are fear-based ideologies that are being thrust upon people that aren't loving. But Jeshua never mentioned any of those things. Jeshua never talked about those things once. Those all came from theologians later on, adding that to the story. And you can thank mostly Paul and Luke, who was Paul's disciple, not Jeshua's disciple, for those kind of ideas. Now, if you dive into Paul's stuff, you find out that most of his stuff is coming from the fact that he was a Pharisee. So he's got a lot of Pharisaic beliefs that he's interjecting into this Christian concept. Jeshua said there was no need for middlemen. If you look at just the text of what Jeshua supposedly said, he was always about the Father and I being one, and you must become one with me as I'm with the Father. He spoke of your direct connection to God. He never said you needed a middleman, a Messiah, a Savior, any of those things. There was nothing that Jeshua ever said. He never once said it. It wasn't until Paul and Luke that they started throwing in these ideas of needing Jeshua, or needing specifically the person who died for your sins. The death and resurrection of Jesus is supposedly the thing that saves you. That's not found in anything that Jeshua supposedly said in the Bible, right? It's never mentioned by Jesus himself. Those ideas are later Christian constructs added to the ideology to match Pharisaic beliefs, to tie it all together, but it's not what Jeshua said. Remember, these books are written somewhere between 70 and 200 years after the crucifixion by mainly Greco-Roman Christians. And so these ideas that were being thrust upon Jeshua's name had nothing to do with what Jeshua actually says in their own Bible. He never says the things that Paul says. He never says the fear, judgment, guilt, dogma, all that stuff. Even original sin was nothing he ever spoke in their own Bible. So if you look at what Jeshua is attributed to saying in the Bible, you find that all the stuff that Paul is preaching and the later books are preaching have nothing to do with the original simple message of love one another. I mean, he specifically was about your direct connection with God, your direct connection with the divine. He also rejected religious hypocrisies. He would overturn the carts because it was the people with the money changers in the temple were with the church. They were part of that process. He was overthrowing the hypocrisy to say, look, this isn't loving, this isn't caring, this isn't beautiful, this isn't us, helping one another. This isn't about love, this is about control. The book of Matthew, he calls out the Pharisees for using religion to control people. He literally calls them out, saying, this is not about love, this is about control. And so it's about literally talking about, it was Matthew 23. If you look at that, it comes down to, he's telling them, don't stop controlling people and just love them. That's the construct. That's the idea. That's the thing that he himself was teaching. And the church does not teach it in that way. So how did the church shift from love to fear? Because that's what the church did. They started interjecting fear into the simple teachings of love of Jeshua. He preached of a personal connection. He preached love and personal connection, and the church introduced these hellfire and damnation and guilt and all these things that were added to the Bible specifically because that does control the people, like the book of Matthew talks about. Even the concept of original sin is not a original teaching of Jeshua. It was a great tool for getting people into the religion, or to get followers, and to find people and kind of trap them into this. You were born in sin, so you got to become a Catholic. That's kind of what original sin's all about. It's not about anything that Jeshua ever taught. He never said you had original sin. What's the original sin? His death. Did he teach that his death was the original sin? Never. Not once. It's kind of ridiculous to even think it. He never demanded rituals, sacraments, confessions. None of that was ever spoken by Jesus in the Bible. None of it. This is all theologians' additions later. The church created these rules, these indulgences, these rituals, these confessions, these hierarchies, the penance, all the stuff. All of that was never once spoken by Jesus in the Bible. Not once. It all comes from theologians later. And Jesus' message was very simple and very loving. The Father and you are one, and love one another as you treat everyone else like you would like yourself to be treated. The golden rule, right? That's kind of the where Jesus' simple message is so beautiful, because it's easy to do, but all of this other stuff is not easy to do. It's more complex. It's more intricate. It's designed specifically to make you have to jump through hoops. Well, the only hoop you need to jump through is the one that jumps into love and be loving. That's what Jeshua taught. It wasn't about you need to do this doctrine, this modality, this dogma, these things to find your way to the kingdom of heaven. No, he said the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's right there with you right now. He was telling you to acknowledge it. He was telling you to step into your divinity. Greater works than I have done, you will do, right? It doesn't say greater works I have done, you will do if you say 10 Hail Marys and go to confession every week and go to the church on Sunday and feel regretful and remorseful that you killed Jesus. Never says any of that. He never says anything like that. That's all theologians' ideas added to the simple teachings of love of Jeshua. Jeshua said you have a direct connection with God. The church says you need confessions and clergy and authority and infallibility of the Pope, but all of these were later additions or inventions of the church itself. None of those were ever said by Jesus. This infallibility of the Pope idea, wow, you take an authority, you tell him he's infallible, which means what? You have to do what that person says because they're the only one who's right. They're infallible and you're fallible. It's really a crazy idea to think that this one person, right? Then you go back and you look at World War II, and the Pope was having back channels with Hitler telling him to leave the Catholics alone. Didn't say anything about Jews. That was fine with him. And, there were several cardinals in the Vatican at the time who were on Hitler's side. So this concept that the church is infallible and the clergy are infallible and the Pope is infallible, all these things, and in reality the Pope is supposedly the only one who's infallible, but he's telling them to leave the Catholics alone, didn't say anything about the Jews. It's kind of a ridiculous statement to think of any person that's here in the physical is infallible, because we're all flawed. That's part of the reason we're here, is to overcome our flaws and come back to the purity of love. Our flaws come with fears. And so we release our fears. The Buddha says the secret to enlightenment is the eradication of fear. Sufis say the veil between you and God is your fear. You release your fear, you come to your direct connection with God. I shall fear no evil, because thou art with me. This is the Psalms say, right? So we're looking at this teaching of our oneness with God, fear being the illusion of our separation from God, overcoming that fear and coming back to the loving place and simply loving one another. I leave you one commandment, love one another. All the rest of this stuff is additions to the ideas of what Jeshua was teaching. Why did they add these additions? Because it became a framework of control. It became a framework of recruitment. It became a framework to bring you in. But none of it was taught by Jesus. None of it. None of it. And let's talk about how some of these things were added. The concept of original sin. That is a construct of St. Augustine. The need for baptism and salvation. That is a later addition by St. Augustine. Thomas Aquinas codified that the church has authority over individual spirituality. Thomas Aquinas is the one that said the church is the authority over you. Thomas Aquinas? That's way after Jesus, right? The church has authority over you and over your individual spirituality, and you must follow the rules of the church to please the authority to become your own spiritual self. Where does that say that in the kingdom of heaven is within you? It doesn't. There's no middleman in there. There's no authority that you have to go to. Council of Nicaea in 325, it said that was where they were codifying a lot of things, and the Bible was done after that council. So the original Bible that they're all going from right now is from the 3rd or 4th century. And when you look at it at the council, they were all trying to figure out, was he a prophet, a teacher, a fraud? And they're looking at they're trying to codify this into an idea of the Christian groups all being on the same page in the same ideology, and they come up with the construct that he was the divine one of God and the only way. That is a theologian's addition hundreds of years after Joshua walked the earth. These are all the theologic ideas that were added to the religion to make the religion have a controlling structure. And so these theologians kept adding ideas.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. Coffee Time with John. This channel runs off coffee, so get your coffee and tea at johnsjoe.com.
The church became a system of power and wealth and control, but it was no longer a reflection of Jeshua's teachings, the simple message of love one another and care for one another, and God is within you, and it is your faith that heals you. You can ask mountains to move, and it'll move. Nothing's impossible for you. That message is lost because that says you have power. And that's why Jeshua was crucified, because Rome was threatened by his potential power of followers, and Judaism was concerned about his, bastardizing the faith. And so there was a lot of struggle with him in general. But then later on, the church says, well, all these things that we killed him for is what he stood up for. Wealth, power, control. That's the thing that the church became, wealth, power, and control. When I grew up, there was a mansion in Rehoboth Beach. It was a multi-million-dollar mansion. In the best part of town, the most expensive part of town. It was the churches, right? Right now in Rehoboth Beach, the church is a big, beautiful old stone building. Right across the street is a house, and the piece of property the church is on, the rectory is on, and the there's another building where they have Sunday school and meetings of that nature. I forget what they call that. Not the rectory, but um, all of that. That piece of property right there, easily $20 or $30 million property. You know, and that's the way the churches have real estate like that all over the country. But and they tell you you have to come to the church and you have to get special compensation if you want to get married outside on the beach or get married in nature. Not allowed. You have to go ask permission, right? You want to get divorced, you can get a societal divorce. Go out and have a legal divorce. The church will not recognize your divorce as a divorce because there's no such thing as a divorce in the church. If you want to get married again, you have to actually go to get your marriage dissolved, because within the church frame, because they don't care about what the state says. Within the church, you are married to the person you married until they say that that marriage itself was not fitting under the laws of the church. And you can have communion, Eucharist, you can get civilly divorced and continue to have Eucharist because you are still married to the person you divorced. It's when you decide you want to have another relationship or another husband or wife or any of those natures that suddenly you have to go to the church, get your first marriage absolved, because if you get married, if you connect, you become another partner with somebody else, you are now an adulterer, even though you're legally divorced. In the eyes of the church, you're not, and you can no longer have the Eucharist until that first marriage is dissolved within the church law. So you go to the priest and you give them that thing that you want to get it dissolved, absolution, and priest does all this stuff, all the paperwork, sends it to the bishop. Bishop is the only one who can approve your divorce within the church. Where's that in Jesus' teaching? Nowhere. Nowhere. All of these are church rules and ideologies to keep the people in control. They are the authority over your spirituality. And that's how they gain their power, their wealth, and their control. They do this by getting you focused on the church rules, doctrines, laws, and they say that we are the authority. They've told you that they are the authority. They told you. They, right? The church told you. Who has authority over you? Only the people that you let have authority over you. Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, the Father and you are one. You can ask mountains to move. He never said anyone has authority over you. Never. Doesn't even say it in the Bible. But the church added all these additions and all these things. They added fear-based theology like hell and sin and excommunication, and they replaced the simple message of love one another. They replaced it with these fear-based constructs, these fear-based ideologies that are designed to keep you in the church. I remember being back behind the altar in the sacristy, and a family came back to visit the priest. And he said, "Hey, how are you? Hey, I haven't seen your envelope this week." First thing the priest had on his mind is he hadn't seen their money. That's exactly how the conversation started, and the guy gave him the envelope right there. It's all about the money. It's all about the power. It's all about the control. But on the priest's mind was, where's your money? How's that loving? How's that caring? It's not. It's greedy. It's the love of money. And when you look at it from that perspective, you start to realize that Jesus is not found in the church. The church is really taking Jesus' message and adding structures around it that have made them powerful and wealthy and gave them the control of the authority over your spirituality. They have literally told you that they have the authority over your spirituality. And if you fall into that, you will be stuck in that rather than stepping into your divinity like Joshua taught. Joshua taught love, not fear, connection, not control. If you felt burdened by all the guilt and self-worth and damaging fear-based ideologies that the church has imposed upon you by giving them self-authority, realize that the church is something that came long after Joshua walked the earth. And even in their own book, they are espousing things that Joshua never said. All that wealth, control, and greed and power that they are throwing at you and taking away from you by saying they have the spiritual authority is nothing Joshua ever said, even in the Bible. Even in the Bible, it's nothing Joshua ever said. You are the one in control. You are the one in power. You are directly connected to God. You don't need a church. You don't need a priest. You don't need any of that structure. Hail Marys, even let's say about the Hail Marys for a second. Joshua never said his mother was divine, right? The virgin birth, later addition by Greco-Roman Christians who were trying to tie Jesus to the messianic ideology of the Jews, but the Jews say Jesus isn't the Messiah, right? So the idea of this is very interesting because all of the constructs have nothing to do with the simple message of love one another. What do you think Joshua really wanted for you? Greater works than I have done you will do. Ye are God's. He washed his disciples' feet to show that he was no better than they. Would your priest do that? Would your priest go out there and show you and tell you that you're equal? No, he stands in a pulpit and he speaks with authority over you. He scares little children. 8 years old, he scared me, thinking I was going to go to hell because I went and played putt-putt golf instead of Sunday mass. That's terrible. That's horrible. That's fearful. That's nothing to do with what Joshua ever said. Even the concept of having to go to church on Sunday is nothing Jesus ever said. All of those are theologians' additions later to control, to put a framework around. But the teachings are far more simple. In fact, in my first regression, I literally said, it's so simple we have a hard time comprehending it. Love one another. There's love, there's fear. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. If that is true, then why is the church using hell, damnation, and the imagery of Dante's Infernos from the Middle Ages, the 9 levels of hell and the demons and all that stuff? Why is the church talking about that? Because Yeshua never did. None of that's from him. That's in that specific case, that's from over 1,000 years later. Dante's Infernos, where that framework comes from. So you look at this, and the church has just leaned into that, right? And the church is evolving into more fear-based ideologies now. The Catholic faith does not follow the rapture, but there's a lot of Christians in the world that do. It was invented in 1830 by John Nelson Darby. Not biblical. This ongoing addition to fear-based ideologies that are supposedly biblical that aren't. The rapture's not in the Bible. Nowhere. And even if it is in the Bible, it was never spoken by Jesus or Joshua. If Jesus is the main man, you probably should listen to what he said rather than what the other people said, because he's the one who talked about it. Go back and look at what just he says in the Bible. Go read the red letters, the things that are in red that are attributed to him directly. You will never once find him telling you to go to Sunday church. You will never once find him to say, go to the church authorities. You'll never once see him telling you're gonna burn in hell and fire and damnation. Not there. People say, he talked about hell all the time. There's a difference between what he talked about and what Paul talked about and what the later theologians talked about. Hell, Gehenna, in that time period, that was the word Gehenna. It was a valley near Jerusalem where a Jewish warlord killed a bunch of children. It wasn't hell, damnation. And that all came after Paul. He said, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to go to a bad place but he never said it was hell, damnation, and fire and brimstone and all the 9 levels of hell and Satan himself. There is no himself. Satan means accuser or adversary or temptation. There's 3 different versions of this, right? But there is no figure named Satan in the Bible. But they'll tell you there is. They'll tell you that Lucifer is Satan. The story of Lucifer is about an angel who fell. Had nothing to do with a Satan. These constructs and theologians' ideologies of fear-based damnation and hell are just fear-based ideologies to use to control you. Go back and look at what Jeshua himself said. He never once said any of it. Those all came later. So if you really want to figure out Jeshua's teachings, like I said, go back and read just the red letter. But understand, even the red letters in the Bible are constructs of authors writing 70 to 200 years later from oral traditions. So they're saying he said this, and it's been handed down. Now you go play the telephone game. You can't get from one person to 10 person without the story changing. How do they expect it to happen over 70 to 200 years and have it be 100% accurate? But it's interesting, the red letters, when you actually read them, they literally tell you that the kingdom of heaven is within you and you are loved and love one another. They don't tell you to go to church. They don't tell you to do the Hail Mary. They don't tell you to do any of those things. You know, Mother Mary, the Catholic Church chose her to be divine. Catholic Church didn't exist until hundreds of years later by theologians making Mary divine. The whole virgin story. Yeah, Jeshua never said it. Not once. Never talk about it. It's not in the Bible. He doesn't say it. Those are all additions to create the pathway to his being the Messiah, the fulfilled prophecy. Coming into Jerusalem on a donkey is to fulfill a prophecy in the ancient text, right? But none of it actually fulfills anything because it's only a theologian saying these things happen. He doesn't say it's happening. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. You look at, is God loving or is God fearful? Jeshua's words are always loving. Hell, damnation, fire, brimstone, sin, punishment, retribution, church authority over you was never spoken by Jeshua once. And so, where did they go wrong? They lost the message of love for the lust of control, wealth, and power. And that's not to say that there aren't beautiful people in the churches. Of course there are. There's beautiful people in all faiths, even atheism. But it always comes back to, do you need them? Do you need the church to tell you that you, because it's the need that they elicit. They elicit that you need them to be saved, to be divine, to be guided by their teachings, to be set in a velvet cage of rules. Jeshua said you can open the door of that cage and fly. Why was the cage? Because later on, to put you in that cage meant they had control over you. So that's my thought on this. I hope this makes sense to you guys. You have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.